I've been learning a lot more about Tina Cherry, who founded the Lewis Brown Peace Institute after her 15-year-old son, Lewis, was killed, caught in gang crossfire on his way to a high school meeting for peace. Many of you heard her preach here on April 22nd. Many of you, as you could see, marched today in the Mother's Day March for Peace, a walk that she founded 22 years ago after Lewis's tragic death. And this year, after discussing it as a congregation at several meetings that were open to all, you chose Tina Cherry's organization, the Lewis D. Brown Peace Institute, as one of the 3 primary groups with which we want to work even more closely as we become more active as a church community together, coming together, working for God's reign of love here in Boston. We chose to deepen our relationships with Tina and with others involved at the Lewis D. Brown Peace Institute. And I'm so glad, because this week when I was trying to learn more about what Jesus could possibly have meant, when he prayed to God to protect his followers so that we all may be one, I realized how much we all have to learn from Tina Cherry. Remember the context of the scripture. Jesus is praying right before his death, and he's hoping his followers will continue his work. He's hoping that they won't all splinter into factions, that they can instead see what unites them, who still unites them. Jesus, the leader, you see, is about to leave the world, at least in the way his followers have known him. And as he sends them forth into the world without him, he's praying, "Oh God, protect them so that they may be one, as close to each other as you, God, and I have been." Have you ever given your all to a project? Maybe started up a business or instituted some new way of conducting business? You've given your all to some good cause or to your family, wanting nothing more than to be a good mother or a good spouse, a good soldier or team player, passing along the best of what you know to those coming up the ranks, so that when the time comes and you are gone, those you leave behind can continue on well. Well, that's where Jesus is. He's thinking about Peter and Mary and John, and they will need help. Protect them, O God, as they are being sent into the world, sheep into a world of wolves, so that they know that they are one, not alone, as close as Jesus has been to God. Jesus' total source of strength and hope. Jesus was one with God, as Julian of Norwich called it, the English mystic that we learned about last week from our guest preacher, Lee Hickner Cunningham. One was the word she made up to describe the closeness with divine love that she sought all her life. The closeness being one that she imagines we all will have when we too leave this earth. Jesus is begging, protect them so that they may be one as we are one. One to each other, one to you. Protect them, God, as I send them out into the world. That was Tina Cherry's deepest prayer for her children, too. Protect them, God. She promised to do everything she could to protect her babies when they went out into the world. She chose to be a stay-at-home mom, to be there for her children. She would go to their activities and do homework with them. She would attend the school meetings. Her son Lewis thrived, an excellent student who wanted to be the first African-American president. He was 15 and she had other young children at home, and Lewis wanted to go to a meeting to promote peace. Tina said this week in an interview on the radio station WBUR, Lewis never walked anywhere. He was driven. The day he walked was the day he died. Do not say he was in the wrong place at the wrong time, said Tina Cherry. He was not. He was 15 minutes from his house, going to the train station where many of us go every day. To dismiss his death that way, wrong place at the wrong time, it makes his death sound inevitable. Just one of those things that happens, especially in certain neighborhoods and among certain types of people. What was Mother's Day like for you after he died? The interview gently asked her. And Tina Sherry takes a very deep breath. You're going to take me back there. She said, it wasn't Mother's Day. I have 2 living children. When Louis died, they were babies, and I didn't know how to celebrate Mother's Day without him. I would give anything now for his runny eggs and burnt toast that he'd make me on Mother's Day. But without him, I couldn't celebrate. I remember once my daughter asked me if I didn't love them as much as I loved Louis. I couldn't rejoice with them on Mother's Day, and wow, something snapped in me. I realized if I'm feeling this way, unable to celebrate, to move on even for my living children, how many other mothers before me are struggling this way? And that's when the idea for the Mother's Day March for Peace began. Not right away, out of a burst of anger or political activism, but 3 long years after Louis's death, it was birthed in her grief. Tina wanted a way to publicly acknowledge her pain, to publicly honor her son who had been murdered, to say that his life mattered, and to be reassured that she wasn't alone. There were others, to make clear that there are others who were in pain and suffering. But more, she wanted to be with others who were also determined to prevent this pain and from afflicting any more mothers. So at the march are mothers whose children have died by violence, with others who come to support them, to make sure the children are not to be forgotten, and who say, this must stop. The crowds now number in the tens of thousands. But even that doesn't really capture what the march is about fully, or what has happened to Tina through the Peace Institute. Because Tina will tell you she has changed. Through her work alongside other suffering mothers, she's had to dig deep into her attitudes, the way she used to put people into 2 camps, the good people, like herself, whose sons would never be killed. And then those other people, so unlike her. She said this: I'm on this journey still. Louis would have just turned 40. Yet through his death, I found my purpose. We tend to dismiss or blame when tragedy happens within certain communities. I thought before Louis was killed, I understood violence. Yet the justification was those type of people, and I was not those type of people. So it would not happen to me. I go to church. I give to the needy. I stayed with my children to be there for them. Louis never walked anywhere. Then death knocked down my door. I had to take off the blinders. I had done all I could to protect Louis. But I would not allow society to tell me now that these things happen in my community. To say that Black lives do not matter in our community. We still have grieving families, and we can't do this alone. We continue to seek to find ways to make a difference, to invest in peace and possibilities and prevention. It's important that we cannot choose which victims we support. How do we decide as a society when violence happens which victims we respond to? We have to be sure that we're not choosing to respond to the young girl or to the 5-year-old boy because he came from Newton into Dorchester and then he was killed, rather than working with the family of the 25-year-old who has a lengthy record and is out on parole. We have to have a protocol, a response that everyone gets. With a family, whether you are the family of a gang member, a family of a 50-year-old, or the family of a 2-year-old, why can't we, this city, respond with dignity and compassion to all families? The same way we did to the Boston Marathon bombing. The same way we responded to terrorism after 9/11. That's the kind of response all families need, especially families in the urban settings, treating families with basic human rights. When Jesus hopes we are all one, it's that kind of recognition that says there are not 2 camps, the good and the bad. William Sloane Coffin, who was the chaplain at Yale, said it is much easier to be moralistic, to have enemies rather than problems that we all need to solve together. It feels much better emotionally to have enemies, but we do so at our peril for our spiritual growth. What does it mean we all are one? I've been thinking this week about water, as if we were all drops of water in the same big system, and of course science tells us it's true. Drops in the Pacific Ocean are no better than those in the Atlantic. Drops of fresh water in the streams in Maine no different from those on the saltwater sprays that come up on Maine's rocky coast. All part of one system. Evaporation, condensation, water drops, sometimes in the clouds, sometimes buried in an aquifer, but all one. So that when water in some wells are poisoned, the whole system is affected. Maybe we don't see it right away. We can ignore what's happening to another person's well, but our grandchildren probably won't be able to. When a lake in the Midwest is polluted or the air fouled, the acid rains now fall here in the East Coast and into the oceans. We'd be foolish to be indifferent to the pain suffered by those bodies of water somewhere else. We little drops are all part of a bigger whole. You see, Jesus doesn't want to change just policies that might make for a greater peace, policies that are out there, but wants to start by seeking to change our hearts right in here. Jesus says, do you know that you're all one? That's where we need to start. All parts of one body, the elbow and the toe, both important and beloved. Because when the toe is smashed, the whole body's in pain and stopped in its tracks. This is where Tina Cherry's true Christian spirit shines through. Because the Mother's Day March for Peace might become a potent weapon for policy change. I hope it does. But it's grounded in first things first. And a deep, deep belief that Tina holds that we are all one, though she didn't start there. How about for you? What do we think? At King's Chapel, we have always prized our individual freedoms of pulpit and pew. Your freedom sitting in the pew to disagree with what's said in the pulpit. In our country, we honor individual freedom of conscience to understand God differently from one another. There's no one creed here at King's Chapel to which we must subscribe, and being all one might sound suspect, like groupthink or mob rule. But Jesus, of course, never suggested that we all have to agree. Rather, it's to see the humanity in each other even when we disagree on solutions to our problems. Knowing that goal that we all might be one is one thing, but developing a sense of caring about the ones we disagree with, it seems not practical. We really aren't our brother's keeper, are we? Tina answers, yes, we are. It wasn't at all clear that Peter and John and Mary were ready to lead the followers of Jesus once Jesus had left them in bodily form. But it appears that the same thing that happened to Tina happened to them. They learned we all are one. They went beyond their identity just as Jews and came to say that neither Jew nor Greek were separate, neither slave nor free when they followed Jesus' teachings, neither woman nor man. Tina started with one attitude, and because of her unfathomable tragedy, losing an innocent child, her views of all her fellow human beings have changed, and they've grown in compassion. She started with one perspective on violence and its causes, and slowly, over 25 years, as she's gotten to know well other mothers who have suffered from violence in our city, she's become a different person. Rather than growing more suspicious of others, as we might imagine, Tina now embraces more people as her sisters and brothers, taking up their causes as her own. Where she saw divides, she now says we are one. And this year, she has done the most amazing thing of all. Her organization supported legislation that was just passed. It was passed and signed into law just a few weeks ago, and what it did is it took the victim's compensation bill that said that you could get money if you had a loved one who was murdered, You could get money for a funeral, about $8,000 to pay for a plot of land and a headstone and a coffin. You could get it if you were impoverished, but you could only get it if your child or the person murdered had not been in some way the cause of their murder. Innocent victims only. We can see why that might have been the law. It seems like the right thing to do not to reward those whose actions bring on their own murder. But Tina Cherry wanted to change the law because she had seen the grief of all of those mothers, whether their sons had brought it on themselves in somebody's eye or not. And so the law was changed. She said, how are we ever going to stop this cycle of violence if we cannot help heal those who are traumatized by it, the families of anyone murdered? This is basic decency and compassion. She stood up, she whose son had been innocent, and she said it to the legislature, and they agreed. Could this kind of life growth happen for me? Could it happen for you? And even an ever-deepening understanding of what unites us all as humans. We are uniting now with Tina Cherry, and I think she just may help us all learn and know. Amen.